everyone, welcome back to the Earthon Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, with your questers Josh and Dan. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things horrifical, as we get to talk about two more of our favorite horrors. Actually, I know one of them is Josh's favorite, but the other one we're going to talk about as well. So we're going to hit up some of those. If you have any questions for us, by all means, drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And you've only got a couple days left before we actually get to FreedoniaCon. So get us your questions because we need content. Because if we don't get any questions for you, we'll just sit there and talk about how we make the show for 20 minutes and bore you all to tears.
Yes.
I promise you, we will be able to stretch that out. We will go into the sausage making of this show on camera.
FreedoniaCon is coming up the weekend after this episode drops. So you only have a few days. Our live episode is on Sunday.
Yep.
Early afternoon Central Standard Time.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we will be recording it and releasing it. And I may even set things up to record so that we can put the actual video up on our YouTube channel.
Oh, you mean have to look pretty?
No prettier than you always do, Dan.
Well, that's a low bar to clear.
So that is coming up. If you have any questions that you want to get into us, then obviously send them in. If we end up with more questions than we need to get through, that's fine. We will, pick them up in the following episode.
Yeah. Any longer answer questions will wait. How's that?
Yeah, it depends on what the questions are. We have gotten some in already, so that's cool. We will have some stuff to talk about. But if you have any, please feel free. So that's item number 1. Item number 2, as briefly as I can, I want to provide an update / follow-up to the episode a couple of weeks back where I talked about 150. Was it 150 or 155?
155, sorry.
155, where I talked about the context around the open gaming license and Dungeons and Dragons and all the brouhaha that resulted from that. I recorded a drop in at the beginning of that episode saying, since we recorded that, things had changed. I want to provide a really quick kind of follow up to what was going on or what has happened to that, just in case anybody's interested. If not, it's not going to take that long.
The floor is yours.
How do I approach this? Okay. So there was the big brouhaha. Whole bunch of companies, Kobold Press, Paizo, were the sort of two big leaders on this, said that they were going to develop their own open gaming license called ORC, O-R-C, the Open RPG something. I forget exactly what the acronym stands for.
Yeah.
The Open RPG Content License, I think is what it's short for. And then a whole bunch of other third-party publishers for D&D, as well as other independent companies like Green Ronin and so forth, all sort of indicated that they were interested in working on this or finding out what's going on so that they could sign on to it in the future. That is still in development. It is being worked in conjunction with one of the law firms, I guess, that does a lot of work with some of the larger, they're like an IP firm that has some experience in the gaming industry. And are kind of working on that. That is still in development. That has not come out yet. Probably not going to come out for a couple of more weeks at least for the sort of initial drafts of that. Kobold Press announced that they had actually been working on their own game, Project Black Flag, which is sort of its code name, its development name. It was something that they had actually been working on for a while, but hadn't really announced. But this kind of gave them reason to say, hey, this is something that we were actually already working on. We're going to have play testing that's going to be coming up here in the not too distant future because that was the way that things were going. And it just basically gave them an option to announce things. Both Pathfinder 2nd Edition and I believe Call of Cthulhu was the other one, sold out of their existing print books. The sales numbers that Paizo reported said that they went through the equivalent of 8 months of sales in about 2 weeks. Dude. That's how much interest there was, or people looking to switch over to Pathfinder, which is sort of related rather strongly to Dungeons and Dragons, and is also sort of another big well-known name in that kind of space.
Mm-hmm.
Then Wizards of the Coast said, oh, the 1.1 was just a draft. or they backed off on that.
Yep.
They came out with 1.2, which changed some things, but also made some other things worse. And they released a poll or started a survey saying, hey, what do you think about this? And kind of like getting the feedback from the fans and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
They said this is going to be running for a few weeks, but they ended up closing it after like a few days because of the large number of responses that they got and the rather overwhelming response to those being, this was a bad move. This is all bad, 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 bad. You know, just like there were a whole bunch of things that were concerns. Like 1.2 rolled back the royalties aspect, rolled back the financial reporting requirements, but there were some other aspects in there that were kind of troublesome. There was a sort of morality clause that was basically Wizards saying, if we don't approve of what you're putting out, we can pull, you know, the license. We can basically say that you're no longer authorized. We don't authorize you to use the license for this material, claiming that it was sort of a way to prevent bad products, you know, glorifying Nazis or whatever other kind of thing from going out. And a lot of people pointed out that, you know, while that is maybe a noble idea, a lot of times these sorts of morality clauses are used just as frequently to shut down queer, LGBT, diverse voices, you know, pointing back to a product that was nixed from the DMs Guild that involved like queer vampires and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then in the sort of biggest shock to everybody, the response from Wizards of the Coast was, okay, we hear you. One, at least for the time being, we're not going to be doing anything with the OGL. 1.0A or whatever it is going to continue to be like the current one.
Yeah.
We're not going to be revoking that. We're not going to be making any changes to that. That is going to continue to exist as it is because we realize that people really don't like that idea of us getting rid of it.
Yeah, because they saw that going differently.
Yeah. And the other part of it, and this is what I think caught a lot of people off guard, is that Wizards of the Coast released the entire 5th edition system resource document. That is basically the thing that had been licensed under the OGL that everybody could draw from to publish their compatible materials.
Yeah.
And released it under Creative Commons.
That's an eye-opener.
Yeah. And not just the selected portions that were kind of like released under an earlier version, the entire system resource document.
Wow.
Everything out on Creative Commons attribution, which basically means that it is now out in the wild and there is not, because Wizards does not control Creative Commons and there's no way to revoke Creative Commons. It's out there now. Anybody can use it, you know, as long as they in the credits or copyright page or whatever it is saying, you know, using material made available under Creative Commons from Wizards of the Coast. That's all that they need to say. If you don't know anything about Creative Commons, this may not mean anything to you, but like there's no share alike requirement. So it doesn't mean that you have to release your own book under Creative Commons. There is no restriction. There's no non-commercial Creative Commons portion of it. It's just basically saying this whole thing is out there. Boom. Here you go. Generally taken as we need to show people that we understand what the concerns are. There's some continuing discussions that are going on with regards to some of the earlier system resource documents, the 3rd edition ones, D20 Modern and stuff like that, that are still technically under the OGL. And there are a whole bunch of games that are sort of derived from them. And especially a lot of the OSR school of stuff, which is a lot of like sort of stuff that most of our listeners probably really don't care a whole lot about, just in terms of like getting into the nitty gritty, because I'm trying to keep this short. And then the executive producer, the guy who is sort of in charge of Dungeons and Dragons at Wizards of the Coast, had interviews done with a couple of people, with potentially more on the way. 3 Black Halflings did one recently. There was another one that came out today that I cannot recall who it was with, but these are on YouTube. Basically having interviews and having some hard-hitting questions, and in some cases maybe dancing around answers. But basically there has been quite a bit of effort on Wizards of the Coast part to try and turn things around. And the executive producer, Thomas Bink, I think his name is, Brink, maybe. Brink, I'm pretty sure, has sort of like been accepting a large portion of the responsibility and saying, we didn't consult with the actual design team because if we had, they would have told us this was a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
They sort of knew what was going on, and
yeah,
we're listening to them more. So anyway, that's kind of where things stand right now. The fact that, at least for now, the OGL is not going away, although it is also not being changed to say that it will be irrevocable, which a lot of people are pointing out, which means that there's nothing that would prevent Wizards 5 or 10 years down the line from trying this sort of thing again.
Yeah.
But it also has not put a stop to the efforts to develop the new open license.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The idea being that there's going to be a nonprofit that is created to sort of administer and control this so that no one company has any control over what goes on with this. And so there is time for the companies that want to sort of get themselves out from under the OGL to do so. The fact that the 5th edition system resource document is Creative Commons is a big help on that. It doesn't help everybody, but that was the big thing. I saw that news about the Creative Commons thing, is like, wow, I would not have expected that. Like, that is farther than I would have expected them to have gone.
No, that's them falling on their sword.
Yeah. So it's not all amazing. You know, there's still a lot of concern. We are still sort of at the end of an era, and a lot of things are going to be changing in some respect in the industry. But there is certainly enough of what went on can be pointed at, like I had said in my initial rant, executives at the top of things not understanding what they were dealing with, and maybe trying to see what, with one particular goal in mind, then trying to see what else they could get away with, and finding out that they had a revolt on their hands, ultimately. It's interesting. I mean, things are like going to continue going on with this here for a while, but things have sort of quieted down with a certain amount of spin and trying to calm people down. And a lot of people are calmed down. So yeah, that's the situation. That's all.
Fair. Okay. Good to know. Thank you for the information. I investigated none of that because I've been busy. So
I have been busy as well, but I have also like had my ear, because of my position and just my broad interest in things. I was keeping an eye on what was going on, and at least paying attention to the chatter and the news and stuff.
Rightfully so. I wouldn't even know where to go find it, but that's just me, because my Google foo is lacking and I'm only a white belt. So, but now we can move on to one of Josh's favorite topics, one of his absolute favorite horrors of all time, Nebis.
Nebis Nebis Nebis.
Nebis is fun. I like the fact that this entry in the horrors book was told to us by the librarian Enwid, and so I find that nice for the in-setting essay. That every once in a while they pull, I can't say a fast one, but just kind of put it on its head a little bit. And this is told to us by the librarian themselves. Nebis has only been reported to us since the end of the Scourge. So either Nebis's appearance is recent or only recently found out, because Nebis was sly and crafty. But then again, they all are. There are 13 listed appearances of Nebis in the records. There is the one from 1423 Thrall and the Caer Mornwood, and 1445 Caer Lenord Deer in the Tylon Mountains. There's 1438 Thrall in the town of Merchad. There's the villages of Caro in 1466, Darren in 1478. I'm trying to read my notes here. Numadvasi in 1488, and Ned Manolis in 1492. Not that 1492 Thrall. And then there's the Samatarula in 1450 appearance. Then there's the cut off appearance in 1463, the Bartertown appearances, plural, 1496, 1501, 1503, and 1504. Yes, I arranged these chronologically. They were not chronological in the book, but I did it for you all. You're welcome, listeners. And then Nebis and various living legend cults, like the Hand of Corruption and the Questers of Vestrial. So, Nebis has been around a little bit, made some appearances. He's not afraid to show his face. And it's not a pretty face, but none of them are. Initial thoughts, Josh?
Nebis has a lot more sort of confirmed sightings as opposed to some of the other horrors where there's like maybe one or two significant instances or events that they are connected with.
Yeah.
Nebis has a whole bunch of them. And part of the reason for this ties into Nebis's modus operandi, the way that he operates. It kind of gets presented that physically he's not that tough of a horror. He is not a difficult entity to fight. Like several of the entries that you rattled through there were thwarted or defeated by powerful groups of adepts, where they managed to defeat or destroy Nebis.
Temporarily speaking.
I mean, physically speaking. And whether, Nebis is working with other organizations or whatever has not been confirmed, but it's interesting to step here kind of real quickly. Nebis's numbers in the horrors book aren't that high.
No.
He's got a pretty high social defense, but his physical defense is only 9. His spell defense is only 12. Like, those are not numbers that are a challenge for journeyman level adepts who might be looking at,
I got a Tiscrane
especially if you get into
higher than both of those in those categories.
He's got decently high damage ratings in terms of how much damage he can take.
Yeah.
He's got a reasonably high death rating. He's got like your kind of standard horror powers with like cursed luck and has some spell abilities and thought worm, but his physical attack and damage aren't particularly high either.
Yeah.
So he is not a physically imposing or physically difficult horror. And so when he gets found out, as he frequently does, his physical form can be destroyed. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that doesn't defeat him.
No.
Because part of the reason why Nebis is so cool, in one sense, is that he actually intentionally allows his physical form to be destroyed because he is a dual-natured horror. Mm-hmm. And dual-natured horrors are awful because their physical body and their astral body are two separate entities. And in order to fully defeat the horror, you need to destroy both of them.
Yeah.
Nebis, I imagine, frequently puts himself forward and presents himself as a desirable target for adept groups to go and slay. Mm-hmm. He causes some problems and drives some common folk mad and slays children, like kind of strolls into town, so to speak, causing problems with kind of like putting a kick me sign of his own on his back. And then powerful adepts groups who hear about what's going on come in and slay him. And then comes the fun part.
Oh, do tell.
What is the fun? No, you tell, Dan. I've been
No, this is your favorite horror, man.
Here's the thing. At some point after the adepts defeat Nebis, the adepts who slew him, the adepts who killed him, will wake up with a mysterious tattoo that will have shown up on their body at some point, usually like overnight or whatever.
Yeah.
There's some mysterious like sort of design or pattern.
Because this is unique to him, his tattoo claim power.
Yes, this tattoo claim power. Go ahead. No, I'm trying to think of the best way to go. So if you've got this kind of like jotted down, go ahead. I am finding myself short of words here.
He persistently manipulates victims' sense of reality using dreams and telepathy at this point. And so it's like a bad acid trip or a good acid trip, take your pick. But he gets you to not exactly trust the reality that you're walking through and inhabiting while you're conscious. And then when you're unconscious, it gets even worse. So that's how he's just so insidious with what he's doing to his victims. Because otherwise, to your point, he's fat, slow, lazy of manner. He's defeated quite often, to Josh's point. He's got a shifty disposition and vows to bring madness to all name givers. But his body is shaped like a cask of wine, or a barrel, with tawny and white fur. He walks on all 4 limbs, long simian arms, and short hind legs. He basically looks like a blonde gorilla with a bone-spiked tail. But really, that's what he does. this tattoo claim power is his mark, and that's his way to therefore know where you are like a GPS location and keep track of you, but also just infect you with just altering your reality one little thing at a time.
Right. So Nebis, once his physical form is slain, has that moment and the ability to mark the adepts that killed him and starts messing with their dreams and telepathically communicating with them. In the example that's given in the entry, the adepts are basically told in a dream, Thistonius appears to them and says, "You have done well. I am so pleased with you. I am now going to direct you to other threats that you can deal with." And having them deal with threats to the point where they implicitly trust these dreams, and then the dreams basically tell them to do something that is not cool. The mayor of this town is corrupted. You need to go and kill them. And so they go in and they kill the mayor. The more they do, the deeper the horror's hooks get into them until they wake up with the tattoos on their body. Then what happens is that they are then sort of told, this is the result of one of these other horrors that you have fought. This mysterious benefactor shows up and says, I am aware of this. These marks are the marks of the horror, and there's this ritual that you can do in order to cleanse yourself of this.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
And so they go and they do the ritual, and what happens is that the marked parts of the body, when the ritual is completed, rip off of the person and fly together and form a new body for the horror. Basically reconstituting its physical form out of the body parts of the other adepts. Those who were fortunate enough to only get an arm or a leg marked can actually survive this. But of course, the one who got their, torso
or their head
marked
or their neck
or their head marked
are kind of SOL.
End up dead.
So yeah, in case all the other horrors we talked about before this weren't creepy enough, there's Nebis in a nutshell.
Yeah.
That's how
Nebis's method of operation is awful and creepy and just deliciously wonderful in terms of how it uses certain expectations and then twists them around to go after sort of different prey. It's fine doing the tormenting villagers and slaying children and being just generally cacklingly evil because it can get stuff out of that, but it really likes the manipulation and torment of the adepts that thought they beat it.
Well, and it really savors that betrayal because it gets you, because after you slay its physical body, it works on the mind. And so it starts sending you dreams that you trust because it pretends to be these people that you trust. And of course, the passions that you trust. And the more you do them, the more you trust them. And so at the end of that, when he finally twists that around and that betrayal comes in, that's where Nebis shines.
Yeah.
More so than any other.
And then, of course, part of the reason why he is so popular in some regards is the way that the entry ends, because the adept that was telling the story about the reconstitution of its body is I don't even want to mention its name.
Yeah.
Lest I draw its attention, I am broken as a result of this experience. I don't want to draw its name or whatever. And the scribe is like, there are actually a lot of stories of people who say that, merely invoking the horror's name is enough to draw its attention and whatever. This is obviously nonsense, because if Nebis were powerful enough to do this sort of thing, blah, 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 and the last paragraph gradually has the horror's name Nebis appear
every other word
in random places until it gets to the point where it's every word, and then it just ends, and the note at the end is in memoriam of the scribe. Because it's just it's again, just such a wonderful thing. This horror was actually adapted. I talk about Monster of the Week quite a lot because I'm fond of it as a game. Tass from the Crit Show, who played in the one shot that I ran for them, as mentioned, Earth Dawn was his first RPG, has written a mystery for Monster of the Week. That's what they call their adventures, where he takes the idea of Nebis and adapts it to a present day monster scenario. the hunters are called in. The whole thing that's going on is that this evil spirit ghost demon thing is gradually taking the body parts of the various members of the family, and if you don't stop it, then it like takes physical form and everybody's dead. I sat down at the table to play with him at Gen Con, and this was the adventure that he pulled out, because he's like, oh, I know you will appreciate this.
I love it.
We got about halfway through, and I looked at him and I smiled, and I wrote Nebis on a piece of paper and just showed it to him, and he goes, yeah. It was just wonderful.
Hey, well, it's a great idea. It's a great idea. And as we said, crib, borrow, and steal from wherever you want to, and he did.
So, yeah, Nebis is wonderful. This is one that, on the one hand, it's a fun, I mean, for certain definitions of fun, he's a fun horror. Like many of the horrors in here, the idea is kind of clever and interesting. But again, like with a lot of horrors, especially with Nebis, part of what makes him
special
is the way that he ends up targeting those that go after him. And as a sort of low-powered physical horror, you can introduce him early-ish in your game and then kind of have it be a slow burn, running into the problem that ideally it is maybe best for him, not necessarily best, but like one of the more interesting ways that you could use him would be to use him against your player characters, where they defeat him and they think they have beaten him, and then his long game develops as something that kind of takes place over an extended period of time. But then again, you've got the idea of, oh, this is something that could, potentially royally screw over your players, and you need to make sure that they are down with that. Obviously, you could also potentially that maybe there's another adept group that they know, another adventuring party or something like that, or something connected to their mentors or other people that they know that might fall afoul of him, and that they would sort of need to investigate as a result of that, where it isn't necessarily quite as straightforward a, you have played right into my plans by stabbing me through the heart.
Well, and I think to make this really successful, before you introduce Nebis, you need to introduce dreams to your player characters, so that way they are used to receiving the information or used to receiving some kind of a dream, and then introduce Nebis, have them kill Nebis. And then so when they start having dreams after killing Nebis, it doesn't seem so out of place.
Right. But again, you want to make sure as part of your campaign premise, as part of your table environment, that the player characters, session 0 and ongoing conversations, that the players are okay with the possibility of the characters being messed with, and to potentially downfall and run into bad situations as a result of what might be going on. Not necessarily like tipping your hand, oh, I'm going to be running a campaign arc based on Nebis, but just generally making sure that, because some people don't like their player characters messed with. All of the entities in here lean a lot more heavily into the horror genre of story, and that is a very different thing than the sort of more heroic high fantasy kind of situation where you are going in and perhaps just gaining justice for those that the horror has slain or tormented before, rather than becoming a victim of the horror yourself.
Yeah, agreed. That's the reason we play Earth Dawn versus any other fantasy game, is there is this aspect, this horrific behind the scenes underlying tension to the game brought on by the big bad nasties, the horrors. And that's why we play this one, because we want that horror element. We want that, do I trust this? Is somebody corrupted? Is this a tainted part of the land? So forth and so on. So yeah, that needs to be part of session 0. Have that conversation to go, this is not the fantasy game you were expecting. This is Earth Dawn. This is in the background at all times. Horrors like this, and the 40 odd that we've otherwise discussed. It's a significant portion of the game setting.
Yeah, there are sections in the game information, in the rules, that talk about ways that the tattoos can be dealt with. I like the dichotomy between, oh, here are all these appearances where the horror like destroyed a care or was defeated by adepts or whatever, and all these sort of sightings. And then just the one case of there was one survivor that managed to come out and escape what happened. Because frequently what happens after the adepts have performed the ritual to reform Nebis's body, because body parts of theirs are removed in the course of that, they are in bad shape, and it is therefore easier for the horror to deal with them, to kill them and deal with them, especially where a couple of the characters taking part in the ritual are more or less killed outright, or very nearly so, as a result of what happened. So anyway, that's Nebis. He's a lot of fun. I am fond of him.
Fun being an operative word. Anyway, yes, we'll seal up Nebis's conversation on that one. On to, I think, one of my favorite names of a horror, Bone Crown the Usurper. It's just fun to say. That's all I got to say. And this is from the Journal of Mustan. And I didn't quite get it at first when I was reading the whole entry, the in-character entry, until I got to the end and I'm like, oh, I know what's going on. This is interesting because this is from an advisor in Parlanthe. Bone Crown always appears as a name giver, but can't do dragon, just to make that clear. He finds a community that's in trouble, and perhaps he instigated said trouble, because that's what horrors do. But then he presents himself as a heroic adventurer and ends the crisis using his powers. Now, it uses its aura of awe power after that to convince people to make it their leader. And once he's in power, begins to twist people around him. Selects probably the strongest-willed, most noble person to corrupt, because that's what horrors do. They like to take the highest and bring them down to the lowest point. They have many followers, will still fight for Bone Crown, even after Bone Crown may have been exposed. This is how powerful his draw is. When Bone Crown shows up as a hero, he usually prefers to wear chainmail, always carries a specific dagger, because the dagger is their pattern item, oddly enough. But Bone Crown always speaks in soft, soothing tones and moves slowly and gracefully as to not to appear to be any kind of a threat to anybody around. Bone Crown, by the way, loves to be flattered. So this is like the ultimate narcissist. Only I can solve this. Only I can save you. But flatter me, flatter me, flatter me. But even though the Bone Crown knows they're hollow platitudes, still likes to hear it. But that's the thing. Bone Crown does have one little weakness. It hates mirrors. Because mirrors naturally expose the nature and the appearance of Bone Crown. So Bone Crown prefers to be just out and about among the people, convincing them, hey, you have a problem, only I can solve this, let's go.
Right. The mirror thing kind of plays into classic folklore and legend around the mystical power of mirrors and the idea of mirrors as a gate between worlds, as a way of exposing the truth of things, especially where old mirrors, like, sort of old style mirrors, were actually created by having silver on the back of them. And it was the mystic nature of the silver that was involved in the properties that mirrors had. It's part of the reason why, for example, vampires do not appear in mirrors, was because of the silver backing of the mirror. Like, that's sort of the connection there. And so playing into that idea of the mirror revealing the truth of Bone Crown's illusions and deceptions. One of the other things that does is that Bone Crown, in addition to infiltrating the community and presenting themselves as a leader, as a hero, as one to be looked up to and admired and the solution to the problems, also likes to pit factions against each other. And that ultimately, if I'm recalling the story correctly, a big thing of what's going on in this journal entry here from this chapter is that the author of the journal gradually comes to realize that this individual is Bone Crown. This is this horror that I have heard about and that has been around since the Invi burnings. Like, there's some kind of history and background that's provided there. And this information was revealed to me by this individual, and so I need to support this individual to go and go up against and to help defeat the horror. And the individual who revealed that information was also Bone Crown. In addition to like wanting that adulation and the followers and whatnot, ends up pitting different factions, both of which he leads, against each other. Again, like sort of a kind of classic divide and conquer horror situation. Like there's nothing particularly unusual in that. The two things that are kind of most remarkable about Bone Crown are his ability to infiltrate and manipulate his chosen victims. He's got pretty high charisma, has a power that makes it easy for him to impress people. First impression on steroids kind of situation. It's like first impression coupled with lasting impression, coupled with winning smile, like all of those social abilities like combined into one that just allow him to set himself up as a leader among people, because most people don't have the social defense to withstand a step 25 social attack against their abilities. And then he's got pretty decent illusionist magical powers, along with corrupt karma and cursed luck. He actually doesn't have a lot of powers compared to some horrors. The other cool thing about him, and his unique thing, because a lot of these horrors have their one unique thing, his karma step. So he has got a pretty high karma pool. He's got a karma pool of 60, but his karma step is actually based on how many people he has following him. So the more people he has following him, the higher his karma step. It starts at 12, and then for every 5 followers, it goes up by 1.
He gets not only that, but the followers of those followers. So if he gets like a chief of an orc tribe, and that tribe follows that chief, those followers count. So it just is exponentially growing.
And the nasty thing about horror karma is that a horror can spend a point of karma more or less on any test that they make. And so if he's got even just 100 followers, he's got a karma step of 32. That's going to add a step 32 dice to whatever tests he's making, which would include his aura of awe. The more followers he gets, the more powerful he becomes and the more difficult he is to defeat. And it's ultimately only sort of revealing the truth that puts a stop to him. But even that ultimately doesn't put a stop to him.
Because it's Bone Crown. He just moves on to the next.
Bone Crown is not a personal horror, unlike Nebis, for example, or a couple of the others that we've talked about, who really tend to go for like a real intimate, personal torment, targeting small groups and doing that sort of thing. Nebis, Joy, both of them kind of like have that low key but cacklingly evil kind of situation. Bone Crown is kind of physically imposing, especially if he's got a large force devoted to him, because his karma step gets so large that that is really, really difficult to deal with. And ultimately, at that point, you can't really physically defeat him. You have to reveal the truth so that he loses his followers and is therefore sort of weakened as a result of that. Obviously, because he gets more powerful the more followers he has, he likes to infiltrate larger communities where he can have more followers and then sort of manipulate them against each other. And so he is sort of a mastermind behind a much more political and complicated mystery of sorts that needs to be navigated by player characters if they are dealing with Bone Crown. So this is one that you don't need to worry quite so much about the kind of personal disaster that, like, say, Nebis would bring to a player character group. Or, one of the others that we've talked about in the past where the player characters kind of get targeted by them, by the horror, then it can be really bad news for them. Bone Crown is very, very difficult to go up against, but ultimately he is not defeated by slaying him, although you might be able to do so. He is ultimately defeated by being unmasked, by figuring out what you're dealing with and revealing that to the point where...
he's exposed and laid bare, and his machinations in playing both sides is finally revealed, where people go, oh, I've been manipulated. I've been duped. Yes.
And one of the things that you run into is actually kind of similar to what goes on in the situation that we talked about with Joy. His followers are, in a sense, victims. And so you will have these devoted individuals who, unaware of the nature of the horror, are willing to defend the person that they are looking up to, this destined hero, that they are willing to sort of put themselves in harm's way to protect this individual. And how do you, as player characters, navigate that difficult situation where you might need to fight innocence in order to solve the problem and resolve the situation? Bone Crown would be a threat to a place like Travar or Jarrus or Thrall. You know, any place where you've got a significant population that could be manipulated to some extent. And again, as a horror that has been operating a long time, is kind of patient and willing to let his following develop over time to make it seem like something that is kind of natural with regards to remaining hidden and concealed in terms of his ultimate presence and goals.
So, no lie there. I find Bone Crown fascinating, and from a larger, longer campaign possibility. To your point, it's not the individual or a small group. It's this one needs to feed on a larger group and the influence that it can have over that larger group. Because, again, to your point, that karma step is just going to get bigger, and the more followers you have, the more influential it becomes, and it just keeps growing. And so therefore it's harder to topple and harder to expose at that point. And so it's a challenge that, to what you said a couple weeks ago, they just can't punch their way out of necessarily. The player characters can't punch their way out of this one or just stab it and hope it goes away. They really need to do some politicking. They really need to do some explanation, and they really need to have the ability to capture and expose versus just kill and leave the body behind them, for lack of a better phrase. And so I think it's better for a longer campaign, a more well-rounded group of characters, and a very tight-knit group as well, where they can have that dynamic to, we can't just kill it, we have to expose it. And so they need to set a trap or be able to reveal this in public and whatnot. And so, or have the means to do so to a large group of people to get those followers to no longer believe in Bone Crown's machinations. So I think this was one of the better creations out of this book. Again, Nebis is fantastic. They're all fantastic in their own unique little way. This one, I think, just ratchets it up a notch higher because of the whole karma step plus followers math ratio.
Yeah, and the political situation that needs to be navigated in order to deal with him, ultimately. That if he is not uncovered early enough in his plots, he is one of the ones that was responsible for what happened ultimately to Parlanthe. He pit factions of the city against each other. You know, this is in addition to all of the other horrors that were there, but his whole thing was, let's take these people and pit them against each other and manipulate them to kill each other.
This is one of the more fun ones I've found, and I'm liking it more and more as a grand scheme of things. Like we said, Nebis, you can lay the groundwork on way early and have a long, slow burn. This is going to be the blockbuster saga instead. This is going to be a very short burn, a very immediate consequence. You're going to have to expose them, and then it's going to have to be over. So you have to figure out how to get that done. And then hopefully Bone Crown doesn't come back again later. But that's just one of those things. So if you have any questions for us about anything you've heard tonight or anything you want to talk about, email them to us. We'll get to them on the live FreedoniaCon podcast on February the 19th, 2023. So until next time, folks, go expose those machinations for your legend. Nebis, 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 Nebis.
Good night, everybody.